After I called out Paul Carter in my last video, he messaged me. And what he said was wild. And then Kassem reached out and showed me everything. Now I think I know the truth, and it's uglier than I ever thought. Frankly, this is really stupid, but we gotta get down to it. So I want to recap what's happening because a lot of people are confused, and honestly, I don't blame you. A few weeks ago, I made a video calling out the horrendous behavior in the fitness industry. Paul Carter's online bullying made the list. After the video went live, Paul reached out to me. And he told me that I should just stop following people I don't like. And fair enough, sure. But then he started throwing some serious accusations about Kassem that are more or less slanderous. Kassem saw the video and decided it was time to finally clear the air. He reached out and offered to walk me through every single claim that Paul made and show me the full story of his side. And we proceeded to speak for over 2 hours. Kassem provided a slideshow, videos, voice messages, and over 430 pages of evidence. That's not an exaggeration, 430 pages. And from what I saw, it completely contradicted Paul's narrative. So now I'm gonna go over with you what Kass and I discussed, so you can decide for yourself who to believe. And before I dive in, I wanna make something really clear. Kass shared some very sensitive and personal conversations with me. Messages from other people who really aren't a part of this drama, nor do they want anything to do with this. So out of respect for their privacy, I'm not going to be showing most of that evidence. And I get how that might impact my credibility to you, and that's totally fair. All I can say is I saw mountains of evidence, screenshots, voice recordings, full context, and I'm going to present what I saw as accurately and as fairly as I can. Any screenshots that I do show is either public or does not involve third parties. If I get permission from the people involved, I'll share more later, but I hope I don't because I want to not do this again. All right, let's get into it. All right, so Paul's first claim. Kass is a pathological liar. Go ask Joe Bennett. Joe finally had to threaten releasing emails from their days working together at MI40 to get him to shut up. From what Kass showed me, and based off of private evidence that I can't share out of respect of privacy, Joe doesn't appear to have any serious issues with Kass. They've had disagreements, sure, but no animosity, no threats, just two professionals who don't always agree, which is totally fine. Next claim, Paul said that Kass has made several personal attacks against him. Look, I looked through everything I could find. I put on my journalist hat. I looked through comments, posts, messages. I went through Kass's evidence. I didn't find a single personal attack from Kass at Paul. Now, I can't say the same for Paul and his comments directed at Kass. Now, there is one comment that I found that Kass said to Paul, but we'll discuss that later. All right, Paul's next claim. Kass asked me to do the debate for months after trying to discredit me. So let's talk about the Shrug Debate. It was a 3-hour argument about whether the upper traps are working in a vertical shrug. And the conversation went nowhere. It looped in circles, and Kass didn't even get to finish his main points that he wanted to go over because they just couldn't get out of the circle. So here's the full context. Paul actually reached out first. He disagreed with Kass's take on upper traps biomechanics. Paul then shares a few studies to back up his stance. Kass points out that these studies were misinterpreted or some things were said that weren't even in the studies. And then Kass and I kind of agreed that interpreting studies is a skill that needs to be developed through formal education. It is not as easy as just grabbing a study and then just reading the abstract. It is a skill, which Paul has no experience in formal education, namely in interpreting studies. So to settle this, Kass sets up an experiment in his gym using EKGs. Paul was involved in this discussion while Kass is setting up the experiment. So Paul even had some input in how the experiment was structured. Kass then shows his findings, which clearly demonstrate that the upper traps do work in vertical shrugs. Paul wasn't convinced. And then from what I saw in the conversation, Paul begins to make the discussion more personal and then framing the disagreement as something beyond the science. And then there's a bunch of back and forth of posts from both sides disagreeing with one another. Kass offers a debate to resolve this. So then Kass proceeds to send a Zoom link. They had a debate, and 3 hours later, it goes nowhere. And then the argument continues in the DMs after the debate has been had. So in my opinion, it's stupid. Kass disagrees with Paul. Kass orchestrates an experiment to show that Paul is wrong. Paul is not convinced. Paul and Kass have a 3-hour debate. It goes nowhere. The argument continues. It's just stupid. The next claim that Paul made is that Kass contacted his girlfriend. The way that Paul framed it, it sounded like Kass was trying to undermine Paul's character to his partner. But here's what he failed to mention. Paul's girlfriend at the time was a massive fitness influencer on Instagram. She's a fitness influencer who makes very similar content to Paul, Kass, and even me. And people in this industry communicate. They share ideas, they disagree, they mention each other in their stories. Totally normal behavior. So what's the nature of Kass's chat with his girlfriend? Well, I saw the entire message history. Undoctored, right from his phone. Kass never brought up Paul's character. Not once. In fact, she was the one that wanted to argue with Kass about Paul. And from what I saw, he disengaged and he didn't escalate. And the remainder of the messages were strictly about biomechanics and going back and forth about different scientific resources. That's it. And look, there are several other big names that contacted her too, because she's in the industry. Does that make these other big influencers wrong for reaching out to her just because she's Paul's girlfriend? Next claim, Paul aired out my personal life when I thought my dad was dying. Pretty serious, right? He's referencing a comment that Kass left on one of Paul's posts. And Paul was attacking Kass in the comments, calling him a coward, calling him a liar, so on and so forth. Kass responded that he didn't want to upload the debate out of respect for Paul's personal situation. But then Paul framed it as a personal attack and immediately played the victim. In my opinion, it didn't come across that way at all. If anything, Kass was explaining why he didn't want to post the debate publicly, because Paul might not have been in the right headspace to show up at his full strength. If anything, to me, that seems more empathetic than anything. All right, Paul's next claim. I've never made a single piece of content about anyone. This is just simply not true. I already shared a post twice from his Facebook where he called out someone called Fat Greg and is making fun of them and why they're wrong. And I've personally seen hit pieces in his Instagram stories. And Paul might like doing that because stories go away, they can be deleted. Unfortunately, I don't have those screenshots. So take that as my opinion, pure speculation. It's not a fact that I can prove. All right, then there's this. Kass tried to discredit me over and over again and using personal attacks. Based on the 400 plus pages of conversations that Kass shared with me, I didn't see a single personal attack. But I did see Paul repeatedly talk about Kass in a very aggressive manner, publicly and privately. Now, I want to address the idea of discrediting. Kass has made posts about Paul's biomechanic claims, just like other creators in the space. Kass has backed them with data. That's not a personal attack. Discrediting someone means damaging their reputation or causing others to lose trust in them. If you present evidence that someone is wrong and they can't effectively defend their argument, that's not a character assassination, that's just debate. So yes, Kass disagreed with Paul. And yes, he presented evidence that contradicted Paul's claims. But from what I saw, there was no personal attack against Paul's character. That perception seems to come from how Paul reacted to being challenged. Now, in this evidence that I saw, could Kass have left something out? Absolutely. But after seeing the volume of evidence, looking at the timestamps that go back 4 or 5 years, unedited and undoctored, I find that really hard to believe. If there are personal attacks from Kass that I didn't see, I'm open to reviewing them. Look, I even offered to have Paul hop on Zoom to share his side of things. He didn't. He blocked me. Kass offered to share his side. Now, one more thing that I want to mention. During Kass and I's discussion, Kass shared several times how Paul is actually kind of a fun guy to hang out with. Kass gave him several opportunities to not only attend his seminars, but also speak at his seminars. Kass had Paul in his home. So we have one side that shows hospitality and another side that shows animosity. Now, as for Paul's character, this is entirely my opinion, but from what I observed, Paul misrepresented almost everything that happened in our conversation. That leads me to believe that he also misrepresented other things. But again, that's just my interpretation. To me, he comes across as emotionally reactive and defensive. It seems like he views people through a transactional lens, supportive when they agree with him and disposable when they don't. And then when Paul gets caught up in situations that he can't fight himself out of, he turns to his ex-friends for help and then cuts ties with them as soon as they no longer serve a purpose. Based on what I've seen in public posts and stories, attacking others, using aggressive language, ridiculing his own following, I personally interpret that as cyberbullying behavior. Whether or not he sees it that way, that's how it looks to me. And the root of all of this, a disagreement about biomechanics and fitness. Of all the things that you can get personally violent about, biomechanics. Cass presents data. Paul reacts emotionally. What could have been a professional disagreement turned into a personal war. And I think it's unnecessary. It's stupid. I want to end with something that Kassem said at the end of our conversation.
Yeah, my final comment is it's sad that not just Paul, but so many people react to disagreement like this, right? Because I love debate. Like, I would quit the majority of my day tasks to just be able to have conversations with the right people on these topics, because that's why I do what I do, and I love it. And I just think it's really sad and disappointing that Paul is basically not only making that impossible, but he basically sets like the worst example of that behavior, and I don't think it's too unfair to say that like Paul has been one of the more negative forces in this space, not just from an informational standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint. Like he obviously attracts an audience, and that audience tends to, I think, pick up on those behaviors. Yeah, I think that's disappointing. I would totally accept a redemption arc for Paul. Like if Paul would somehow get hit on the head and then all of a sudden be like, hey, I can have disagreement conversations with people and listen, whatever. I'd like, cool, dude, no ill will, personal shit. I don't really care about it. Like, it's disappointing, but it didn't ruin my life, or anything. It upsets me because it does impact my business, it impacts my employees, it impacts my students, right? Yeah. All negatively. But me personally, I could move past that. And I think, the industry would be better.
Now, Paul, I hope you're watching this. I'm still open to having you on Zoom and sharing your side of the story. But I want to leave you with this. If your best evidence against criticism is to talk about how someone hurt your feelings instead of presenting better ideas, you're not in the fitness industry to help people. You're here to be worshipped and to have people stroke your ego. That's all I have to say. You don't have to agree with me, but now you've seen both sides. You can make your decision on your own. We'll see you in the next one.